Before we set up a default route that's going to use port 4 as the egress or outbound interface as it sends traffic out to the internet, we need to make sure we have an IP address on port 4. So that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. So here's our game plan. We're going to configure port 4 with the IP address of 23.1.2.71 with the 24-bit mask. So back at Firewall 1, we'll go down here to Network on the left-hand side and click on Interfaces. There's our management interface on port 1, and we want to configure port 4. So we can just double click here on port 4 or single click it, and with it selected, click on Edit. Either way is great. And let's go ahead and call this 2 ISP, because that's where that interface leads to. And then as far as the IP address, let's go ahead and put in the IP address, 23.1.2. And we want to use 71 with a 24-bit mask. So this allows a /24, or you can put the dotted decimal flavor of a 24-bit mask. Either way is great. Let's also allow ourselves to do some testing with that interface. So we're going to allow ping on that interface. That way, if we ping that IP address from another device on that 23.1.2 network, this firewall will be willing to respond because we're allowing ping. And then we'll click on OK. So here's port 4, because I put the alias as 2ISP, it's sorting it based on alphabetically. So if we click here on 2ISP, which is port 4, double click it. In the edit pane here for this interface, over here on the right, we have an option for edit in CLI. I love this feature. So we can bring up a CLI by clicking up here. It brings up a generic CLI for us. Or in this edit pane for interface, we can click right here and edit in CLI. Oh my goodness. It shows us the CLI configuration for that interface. And then from right here, we can continue the editing at the CLI. I love it. So convenient. So the name we assigned it to ISP is shown up as the alias. Here's setting the IP address. Here's setting the allow access to ping. And look at this. Here's the config for IPv6. And that's fantastic. Oh, one other thing I want to share with you right here is that if you'll notice for the IP addressing, it only shows IPv4. So let me click OK here. I don't think I made any changes, but if we want to see the IPv6 information so we can configure it, here's how you see it. You go down to System on the left, and then under System, we click here on Feature Visibility. And if you want to see IPv6, you simply enable it right here under Feature Visibility. So I'll enable it, and then we'll go ahead and click on Apply. So now that that's been saved, we go back to Network, and we go back to Interfaces, and we go back to port 4 here, and we double click on it. Now it has the options for us to also configure IPv6 information. And that's a general rule of where you'd go if you have something you want to configure on an interface or part of the firewall, but you're not seeing it in the graphical user interface. Again, that's going down to System, clicking on Feature Visibility, and then enabling or disabling those features that you just want to have seen in the GUI. So I'm going to go ahead and disable IPv6 as far as the visibility of it. Click on Apply. We'll go back to Network and go back to Interfaces. And now if we go back to that port number 4 by double clicking on it, now it no longer shows in the GUI the ability to configure IPv6. And since we're here in the interface section for the firewall, let's also configure the other two interfaces that we're going to need. So if we look at our topology, the other two interfaces are port 3, that is on the 172.16.1 network, and port 2, which is on the 10.123.0 network. And we're going to use the last octet of .71 for all of the interfaces here on Firewall 1. So let's go ahead and do port 2 next. So we'll select that and then click on Edit. Again, double clicking on port 2 would also bring up the edit screen. For the alias, I'm going to call this 2 inside, meaning to the internal network. And then for the IP address, that is the 10.123.0.71 with a 24-bit mask. And let's also allow ping on that as well. Click OK. And let's do our DMZ on port 3. So we'll select port 3, click on Edit. We'll go and call this DMZ for Demilitarized Zone. And specify that we want to use 172.16.1.71 with a 24-bit mask, and click on OK. So let's check our work here real quick. So we have port 1 with that address. That's how we're currently connected. Port 3 connects to the DMZ, and it has the address there. It looks good. And if we scroll down, here's port 2 on the 10.123 network, and here is port 4 on the 23.1.2 network. And so now if we went back to the dashboard, and we went down to Network from the dashboard, we now have 4 routes, and those are the 4 directly connected routes. So we can click here on this, it'll expand it to show us exactly those routes. And the reason that it has 4 exact routes is because it's connected to 4 exact networks, and it knows how to reach those IP subnets. And again, for any of those interfaces, if we wanted to do it at the command line, we certainly could. Just go back to Network, go to the interface, select the interface you want to configure, and then you can do it here with the Edit CLI option, or you could just go to the CLI and do Config System Interface, type in Edit port 3, and you'd be at this exact point manually. But I think it's super cool that they actually put you there to save you a bunch of time if you need to go to the CLI for the configuration. All right, let me close that. So now that we have the 4 interfaces that we need, 1 for management and 3 on the data plane, our next task is to add an additional route, a default route, so that this firewall knows how to reach the public internet. And we'll do that in the next video. I'll see you there in just a moment. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.